The rest is downhill, guys. Piece of cake now. Multiplying and dividing fractions are a lot easier than adding or subtracting them, in my opinion. So let's look at an example. Please write down how to multiply fractions. Okay, so for an example, let's look at 1/3 times 2/5 equals what? To multiply fractions, we do it straight across. In other words, take 1 times 2, 3 times 5. There it is. Simple as that. Okay, so I'm not going to go into much more details because just straight across. Okay. Let's look at a real life situation where if you have a person that, let's call him Bob. Let's say Bob earned $90 for mowing lawns. Okay. Now, let's take Bob to the movies. If he spent, as of today, the Avengers, the Endgame, is just entered into the theater. So, let's say Bob spent 3/10 of his $90 watching the Avengers. Okay. At the movies. Guess what the question is? How much did Bob spend at the movies? Okay, so if you only knew what is 3/10 of 90, right? That's how much he spent at the theater. So the question that we need to find out is, what is 3/10 of 90? We can translate that question into an algebraic equation. What, we don't know, so let it be x, is equal 3/10 is 3/10 of, wherever you see the word of, is multiply times 90. And we can write 90 as 90 over 1. Okay? This is not common for you to write a whole number over 1. But in the case of when you want to multiply fractions, that's what we need to do. So multiply fractions straight across. 3 times 90, 10 times 1. You can reduce this to simply 27. And since the question asked you how much did Bob spend, you would want to put $sign there. Okay? And that's our final answer. He spent 27 bucks at the theater. Okay? Like I said, the rest is downhill. You can handle this. Cheering for you. Okay. So, I know how much you guys love fractions. So let's look at some more. What is 1/4 of an hour. Okay, so 1 hour. Let's think of it in terms of minutes. 1/4 of an hour equals how many minutes? So if we were to break up an hour, well, 1 hour have 60 minutes, right? If you were going to think of it in terms of a clock, so from the top to the right side here is 15 minutes. If you go to the bottom, it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes. If you were to look to the left, okay, so 1/4 of an hour. So starting at the top here, 1/4 of an hour is 1/4 of a whole circle. That is 15 minutes. Okay. Now, if the question was to ask you, what's 1/3 of an hour? How many minutes would that be? So, probably best to draw a picture. 1/3 would be something like this. Okay, so 1/3, if you were starting from top, would be this section here. How many minutes do you think that is? So that's 0 minutes, right? Up to here, if you were to divide 60 into 3 pieces, you would get 20. So another 20, you would get 40. Okay, so 1/3 of an hour technically is 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm just setting you guys up for our ultimate question here. Okay, before we look at that final question, please make a note of this here. What's the distance formula? Okay. Some of you may have heard it. Some of you may have forgotten what it is. So the distance formula states that rate times time equals distance. Okay, so we're going to use this formula for our next question. Okay, please make a note of it, that rate times time equals distance. Okay, now for your final question. Let's say it took Lance, I'm thinking Lance Armstrong. He's a great bicyclist, by the way. It took him half an hour to bike 3 miles, let's say, to somewhere, school, for example. Okay, university. Okay, so let's say what's his average rate? How fast is he biking in miles per minute? Okay, so what's his average rate of speed in miles per minute? Okay? So let's underline that. Because if you're driving, it might be miles per hour. But since we're bicycling here, let's say miles per minute, okay? So the goal is to find the rate so you need that formula. Remember, rate times time equals distance, right? Rate times time equals distance. If you want rate, we need to isolate rate and get it by itself. So here we have rate times time. Time is in the way. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the opposite of time? Okay? So the opposite of multiply time would be to divide time. Okay? Since there's an equal sign there, we need to divide time on both sides. That cancels out time. So ultimately, rate is equal to distance over time. Okay? Now, the rest of this, we just have to plug in the numbers. Okay? So, rate is equal to distance, 3 miles, over the time, half an hour. How many minutes would that be? Because we're asked to find the rate in miles per minute. So how many minutes is half an hour? 30 minutes, right? Okay, so let's reduce this because 3 can go into 30. So 3 can go into itself 1 time. 3 can go into 30 10 times. Okay, so we have 1/10 of a mile per minute. Okay, weird answer, but that's all that we can do. Okay, so 1/10 of a mile per minute is what Lance bikes at on his way to school. Okay, give yourself an applause. We did a nice job. See you in our next clip.